So today we're going to be talking about formatting and titles. Fun fact, as I was doing research on improving titles and improving formatting, because even though I know all this stuff from being an editor, I think it's important to go over it irregardless. What other people have said. I ran into someone who had a quote that I found quite terrifying. He has a master's in advertising and marketing language, and he mentioned that in a study that he did, he found, his name is David Ogilvy, don't ask me how it's spelled, I can barely pronounce it, but he, in his study, found that 80% of people only pay attention to the title/headline of something, and that if the formatting is bothersome to the eye, people don't even pick it up. So these are actually important, which is weird, because you would think formatting, that's just like putting a tab before this paragraph. Like
it's so helpful.
But it's so helpful, and it makes it clear and crisp and concise, and it makes it so your reader isn't confused. And so ultimately, even though it doesn't seem important, it is incredibly important. And titles, unfortunately, are also important, because what does everyone do that we wish they didn't do? They judge a book by its cover. Completely. And that's okay. I do it too. There's some covers where I'm like, oh, that's really pretty, and therefore I pick it up, and then I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of lame, and then I pick up one with the lame cover, and it sounds like awesome, and you're like, I judged it. I did. So titles are just as important as your cover page. When talking about a novel, obviously a cover page is something that, if you're self-publishing, you have full control over. You generally pay an artist and tell them, this is what I want. Whereas if you're traditionally publishing, you may or may not have a say in it, which can be problematic. But at the same time, I will say the one benefit of it is that they know what they're doing because they know marketing. So even if you don't necessarily like the cover, the marketing may benefit you, even if you don't like it. So those are the drawbacks with that. However, title is something that you most of the time have control over, irregardless of traditional or self-publishing. With traditional publishing, if you have a title, unless it's an absolutely terrible title, you generally can keep your title. So it's important that you have a good one up front. And this includes with short stories, because with short stories, a lot of times when you're submitting short stories, people will judge based on the title. And they will make assumptions based on the title. And so title is actually far more important than people give it credit for, as well as formatting. First, we're going to talk about formatting now, because formatting is something that's a lot more basic, whereas title takes a lot more finesse, and it's a lot more brainstormy kind of individual process. All right, so first we're going to talk about dialogue formatting. All right. So, that is supposed to be 2 T's. Sorry if it looks like an H. All right.
That's me all the time.
So, with dialogue formatting, if you guys are still confused by the end of this, I am totally happy to put together a document with all the proper and appropriate formatting to have you reference at the bottom of the YouTube video. But if you guys are feeling pretty solid on it, then I might not do that. So let me know how we're feeling by the end. All right. So with dialogue formatting, you're typically going to want a tab, obviously, at the beginning of any new paragraph and any new dialogue. Dialogue always has to be tabbed. So you're going to make sure it has the tab, and then you're obviously going to make sure it has beautiful quotation marks, unless it's internal dialogue. But we're talking about regular dialogue right now, the one where you actually speak the words out loud, because internal is totally different. All right, so you have regular internal dialogue, so you have blah, 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 blah. They spoke words. All right, next, you're going to have, I don't know, Duke stuttered. Now, what you're wanting to avoid is any confusion of making sure that they know who is speaking what and when. Now, if you do dialogue and then Duke stuttered and then more dialogue, people are going to assume Duke is still talking. However, if you then say, Kylie exclaimed, now we have no idea who said this sentence, if it was Kylie or Duke. We can assume it's Kylie, but it's better, if you're going to do that, to just re-tab and start a new line. Always re-tab and start a new line if someone new is talking. And even if it's two people, even if it should be obvious who's talking, it's okay. Just tab and start a new line, tab and start a new line. The only time you don't is if it's a continuation. So you're explaining that Duke stuttered, and then you're continuing to have Duke talk. You're gonna wanna make sure you do this with action tags too. So action tags, just to clarify that for those that don't know the term, where'd I put the eraser? Sadness. All right. So action tags, for those who do not know what action tags are, is when you have a line of dialogue, and in my opinion, action tags are the superior dialogue tag, but that's just me. So everyone has their own opinion, so if you don't believe that, that is okay. Just know I might mark down action tags a lot because I like action tags. So the reason I like action tags so much is because of the fact that it gives you, we as people generally don't sit exactly still like a robot as we say something unless you're a soldier in the army. And even then, generally your eyes are moving around, right? You're like looking at a bird over there. So there's some sort of movement generally when you're talking, unless you're really truly freaked out and still as a stone. But even then, generally there's heart fluttering, there's something going on internally, you know, your brain's racing. There's all sorts of different action tags you can do. You can do her brain raced, or she ran like the wind. So this is all saying she's doing this while also speaking. Now with action tags, that also means that if a new person is talking, you're going to want to make sure that you clarify it by doing another line. If you don't differentiate them by line, then we get confused and muddled as to who's talking. And it can be really hard to tell a story that way. It's doable, but it's hard. Some people do it and just be like, that's my fancy format. And you can get away with that sometimes, but only if you're an English major. And even then, it's debatable. Some English majors are different than others. And I found the eraser exactly where it was supposed to be. All right. Now, next we're going to do internal dialogue. So I'm going to modify this. Internal. So this is when you're thinking about something. So thinking, gosh darn it, I totally failed that math test. You aren't telling everyone you think that, but you're thinking it. You're going to want to make sure you put it in italics. Italics is your best friend for internal dialogue. And you're also going to want to make sure that you have it from only one perspective. You don't want internal dialogue going on between multiple people unless you're doing telepathy, in which case you follow the same rules as prior, and when a new person is speaking, you tab and start a new line. If you're doing telepathy, that is the only time I would say it is okay to do multiple internal dialogues is using telepathy. So if you're not using telepathy, generally just stick with one person's internal dialogue and make sure that you follow that person's train of thought. Yes?
What about like schizophrenia or something like that?
Schizophrenia? That's an excellent question.
A lot of people, you can the person's actually talking, so I'll put
Yeah.
that in quotation marks, and then if you're talking to them while thinking, I'll put that in italics.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of different ways to do that. That is a good way to do it. You could also do it so that way it's all in italics, but also has the quotation marks. So that way they know to you it's completely real, but to everyone else, they don't hear that because it's italics. So there's all sorts of different ways you could do that with schizophrenia. I would say with schizophrenia, if you're going to write something with schizophrenia, just make sure A, you do your research really well, and B, if you're doing the formatting for that, make sure that you do your best to indicate when it's in their head versus when it's not in their head. Because it's going to get really confusing for the reader when it's in their head versus not. And unfortunately, even if for the main character, they have no idea what's in their head and what's not, the reader wants to know. Even if the main character doesn't. It's important that the reader knows things because they like knowing things. Or at least I as a reader like knowing things. I don't know about you guys, but I like being not confused as a reader. So, alright, next one we're going to talk about is flashback formatting.
Oh no, it's such a nightmare.
It is kind of nightmarish because with flashbacks, it takes a lot of work to make it clear as to what is happening when. So, yes, you have lots of flashbacks, and I was like, this has the potential to be great, but I have no idea what's happening. And so that's why I was like, it's important that we talk about all these different formatting stuff, because I've noticed a lot of different formatting stuff, and especially stuff that when I've edited, you guys have been like, well, I don't really like that. It's like, I'm editing it because it has to be this way. It's not an option. But if it feels like that doesn't make sense to you, then please talk to me about why the formatting doesn't make sense to you, so that way we can clear up what I'm mis-explaining or not explaining well enough. Because honestly, as a professional editor, I do get a lot of questions where people are like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, I have to then explain myself. So if you guys could help me with that by saying, hey, this doesn't make sense in advance, then I can do my job even better. So honestly, you can help me if you're confused. Feel free to ask questions. All right, so, the pen. The pen!
No.
We've lost the pen. You know what? I'll just keep trying. Maybe it'll work if I press hard enough. All right. So, with flashback formatting, you're going to want to, once again, if it's in the past, don't worry, it'll work eventually. There's another pen. Ooh, we have another pen. Let's pray it works.
You do?
Yes, we do. It's a brown, but it works. All right. So, once again, if it's in the past, you're going to want to do italics. Because that way they know that something has changed. By seeing the fact that the font has changed slightly, they know that something has changed. You're also going to want to make sure that you, before the flashback, do some sort of page divider in the center. I usually do stars because it's easy to just hit the asterisk button 3 times and then center it, but that's just me. You could also do fancy things, like I know that a lot of formatters that are like professional formatters that do the fancy stuff will do like crowns if it's a book about royalty or stuff like that, but like that's the fancy thing. This is just the basics. I'm just telling you how to get it across basically. Alright, so if you're doing a past flashback, you're going to want to make sure it's italics, and you're going to want to make sure you have 3 stars before it's centered in the middle of the page, and then when you finish the flashback, you return to normal text, so present, oh gosh, is regular text. And then you're going to want to make sure that before you return to regular text, you do this again. So when you enter past tense and exit past tense, you want to make sure you have those dividers. And if you're entering a future tense, because let's say they're a soothsayer or something and they're like, in the future, I see, and you have this epic future flashback, which is actually a thing. Flash forward, there you go. So with the flash forward, you're going to want to make sure that if you have past and future flashbacks, you're going to want to pick something else, like bold for the future, but if you just have future and present, you can do italics. That's the weird thing. So you're going to want to make sure you figure out what you have. If you have flashbacks and present and future flash forwards, you're going to want to make sure that you differentiate it somehow. So if you have all 3, do bold. If you have just present and future, do italics. Does that make sense? Yes.
Okay, so like instead of like doing bold, could you like have it all underlined?
You could, but let me tell you right now, as a person who has seen that in some books, it's not easy on the ice. It's a little hard to read. I don't know why, but it kind of gets a little much. I don't know, maybe that's just a personal preference, but whenever I've seen an entire paragraph underlined, it feels like the person is yelling at me in emphasis. And it doesn't feel pretty. So that's why I say bold, because even though bold feels like emphasis, it feels like subtle emphasis. Kind of like when someone says, gosh darn it, and darn it is bolded. Right? That feels like subtle emphasis. But if someone said, gosh darn it, in underlined, I feel like I'm being yelled at. So you could do underline, just know that it's going to feel a tad bit aggressive. So it's all about how you want it to feel. If you want it to feel aggressive, then go for underline. But that's only if you want it to come off aggressive. That's my personal opinion. What if you're always aggressive?
An entire book in underline.
Yeah,
Imagine that nightmare when you
oh
wake
gosh.
up in a cold sweat just remembering that underlined booklet.
Just, oh my gosh.
My
Yeah,
eyes.
that's intense.
Yeah,
All right.
you're just gonna have to like.
Okay.
Like you're just gonna have to be cautious. Like.
Just
Any
to see
other
again.
questions about flashback slash flash forward? Yes.
I actually have a question about people talking about.
Oh, dialogue, yeah.
A journal entry
Mm-hmm.
or something like that.
Yeah.
How would it be formatted?
Absolutely. So I actually have letter slash journal entry formatting coming right up. So if you want, I can just skip to that one, or we can wait till we get to that one, whichever you prefer. Okay, great. So the next one I'm going to say is point of view change formatting. Now, the first thing I'm going to clarify with point of view, I'm just going to say POV because that's typically what people say nowadays. But with point of view change formatting, first thing I'm going to say, don't change point of view unless you absolutely have to. If you're just going to randomly change point of view to the love interest for one paragraph and then never do it again, why? Exactly. Why? What is the point of that?
All of those will just be question marks.
Exactly.
Like-
All the question marks. Yeah, so
It's like, where's Ross?
what is happening? Just get rid of that paragraph. Yeah. So if you're going to do a point of view change, first of all, make sure it's necessary. Then, if you've established, yes, it is in fact necessary, then here's formatting. You can do it multiple different ways. If you're doing chapter chunks, so in other words, a whole chapter is in, let's say, Imelda's point of view, and the other chapter is in David's point of view, then you can just do what Percy Jackson does and do David at the beginning of the chapter and then Imelda at the beginning
Your
of the
brown
other
marker
chapter.
has also died.
This is true. Wait, what?
Your brown marker has also died.
Yes, the brown marker has also died. It's starting to come back to life though, so maybe,
It was right for a while.
yeah. It decided to fall unconscious and now it's coming back.
It's like David's house, David.
Yep, David, house David. My D&D group loves that. Alright. So, alright, but yeah, so if you're doing David and Imelda, we have a box over here, maybe it'll work. Oh, no? What the? Never mind. That is not a marker. Alright.
Wait, what is it?
I don't know, so I'm gonna put it
What?
back in
Throw
the
it at me.
box. No, thank
Oh,
you.
it kills me.
It seems fragile, so I'm gonna gently put that back.
Oh, it won't kill you. You can kill it.
Alright, so markers are dead, but that's okay. So, hey, this one's working again. Alright.
It's alive.
So, you can start at the beginning of the chapter with David and Imelda, or if you're switching in the middle of a chapter because you're like, guess what, Imelda's now unconscious, so I have to switch in the middle of the chapter, otherwise no one will know what's happening. Then you can do, once again, it's dead.
Just stop dying.
Maybe we need to, just as a present, just like Happy Lit Librarians Week, we're just gonna bring you
Bring a bunch of markers.
a
There we go.
huge,
I've
like,
been meaning to do
coffee
this.
size
I
plate
forget.
of markers.
That'd be great. So, if you're switching point of view, you're going to want to do some sort of marker. Again, it doesn't have to be asterisks in the center of the page. Generally, 3 of them. If you do just 1, it's awkward, and if you do 2, we're confused. 3 is generally the number. I don't know why, but that is. Can you do what? Theoretically, you could do 20, but then at that point, you might as well have a page divider. So,
No.
theoretically.
Just go to insert, go horizontal line, and it would do that for
Yep,
you.
just bonk. Alright, so generally you're going to want to put 3 asterisks in the middle of the page and make sure it's nice and centered, all cozy like. Then we know something is changing, and then the other thing that you're going to want to make sure you do is if it is not first person, please don't do this in first person, it's very confusing. Some people actually do this where they switch point of view and it's still in first person.
No.
So it's like, I don't know which I is I or which I is David.
Oh, yeah.
Question mark?
Like, I don't get it. But if you're
The book Forget Me Not, have you read it? It's about
I have
girls
not.
with Tourette's. It does that,
Uh-huh.
but you can tell the difference because one it writes in verse and the other writes in just regular.
Oh, see, there you go. You can do things like that where if it's first person, you make sure that there's a distinct stylistic difference. But if you're not doing a distinct stylistic difference, maybe avoid first person. Doing a point of view switch. But if you're going to do a point of view switch, generally make sure in third that you say the name at the beginning. So you say David, etc. Imelda, etc. So that way the person is aware of where they are. If you just say she, he,
Which he or he?
exactly, which she or he, for all we know, it could still be Imelda, and Imelda's saying that he did this. So you gotta make sure that you distinctly tell us which point of view you're in from the very first name in the sentence. Or, like with the first person, change entirely different styles of some sort.
Yeah, no,
Alright.
have it all underlined.
Or all underlined, apparently. That's what we're going with. That's the vibe of today.
Wait, well, what if someone's just very aggressive? Like one of your characters is just very
Alright.
aggressive, so it's just like all underlined. So like me, I am very aggressive. Have you met me?
See, I still feel like even with people who are very aggressive, there are varying levels of their varying aggression. Like there's aggressive, and then there's aggressive in lowercase, and then there's aggressive in all uppercase,
And
angry
then-
font,
and
then
And then aggressive in
there's-
weird cursive thing.
yes, and then
Yeah.
aggressive in weird.
Where it's
cursive
like
font.
manipulation is the name of the
Exactly.
font.
Gaslighting font.
That's like gatekeep girl boss. That's what it is.
Yes. So with even aggression, and I would say the same thing with italics and bold, don't overuse it. If you're doing it to emphasize something, make sure you don't overuse it. You emphasize maybe a word. And if you're going to emphasize a word maybe every 3 paragraphs. Don't emphasize a word every paragraph. Then it just feels a little old. That's just my opinion though. Some people love doing that, and it's a stylistic thing, and that is their choice. But that is my personal opinion, is that italics tend to lose value, and so does bold and underline, the more you use it. So if you can use it less, that's why I say with flashbacks and flash forwards, using all bold or all italics is nice because it loses its meaning. It's just purely conveying this is a different timeline. It's not conveying emphasis, it's just conveying time.
Yeah, no, you use up like full 50 pages of just like emphasis.
Alright, next one, chapter formatting. Now, fun story, everything that I am teaching you is currently for basically school and things like contests. When you're actually doing formatting, it's gonna look a little different. You might notice that in a novel. For instance, I ask you to do double spaced because then I can do edits on the side and it has more space to do that, and your teachers probably ask the same thing. But if you were actually to publish that, you would put it in single spaced. Maybe 1.5. And as far as that goes, the tabs would also be smaller. But those are nitpicky things you worry about when you actually publish the thing, not when you're having it get edited and submitting to a contest. Alright, so unless the contest tells you specifically to put it in that format, in which case, don't. What? Where is this contest? Because I haven't run into a contest that actually asks me to put it in this format. Anyway,
It's in that map.
so if you want to do fun things like the giant letter at the beginning and then you can totally do that. Just keep in mind you're going to have to figure out how to make it fit, because sometimes the next line starts here and then you can't read that because the T is in the way. So make sure that you don't make your extra big letter too extra big. Otherwise you can't read the next sentence. The next part that I'm going to talk about is the fact that you want whatever number you're doing, you want it to be clear and in the center, or you want it to be fully spelled out. And please, for the love of everything that's holy, do not randomly switch between fully written out and that. You can't do one and fully written out one. So like chapter 1 and then chapter 2 is spelled out. No. Keep it consistent, please. just for me.
Wait, well, what if it's written out and then it's like in a different point, like and like person chooses point?
Oh,
But if
gosh.
it's like not, then it's
Theoretically, you could do that, but it would still bother me personally, as a human being. All right. So that's
I
gonna
just spell them out, and that is like 2-digit numbers.
right. See, so everyone does it generally either spells it out or does it singular. When it comes to actually spelling numbers, though, number formatting is actually funny. If it is a singular number, so for example, 1, you write it in the sentence. I have 1 apple. But if you have, I have 100 apples, you don't do that. You do 100. You always write it out if it's double or triple digits. You only don't write it out when it's a singular digit. Fun fact. So, speaking of numbers. All right, next. Tabs. Now, none of you have had this problem. Thank all, that is amazing. But I'm still going to mention it because of the fact that we're doing this as a video, and there are some people who don't know this. A tab is an actual thing. Believe it or not, I actually read a self-published book recently that they did not have tabs, they just had random spaces.
Oh, I did that for the longest time.
Yeah, some people do. Some people do, and that's okay. It's a thing. But you just know that tab is a thing.
At one point, I didn't even space it at all. Like,
Oh,
it was just a whole huge
block of text.
And I'm just
Yes.
like head first, and I can't read it.
Yes. So that's why I'm like, I am not trying to attack anyone who does this. Just know that a tab is a real thing. Please use the actual tab and not just random
use it,
spaces.
I beg you.
And please actually use the tab, because we don't like big blocks of text. Big blocks of text hurt our eyeballs, like you were saying earlier.
You just, like,
All right.
That's intimidating. No one wants to read just this.
Exactly, just giant block.
Just take a look at me in Genius Day. I'm writing whole-on essays, and all you have to do is a paragraph.
That's fair. That is kind of terrifying. All right. So, all right. So now we're going to talk about letter and journal formatting, since you mentioned that before. And I know that a lot of people, letter and journal, I see them as journal. I can spell. All right. I promise I'm an English major. English is still hard. Anyway.
English is the weirdest language ever.
Like,
So
sometimes
weird.
E makes the sound, but sometimes it doesn't make any sound.
I still think some of my favorite videos on TikTok are when French is trying to like figure out what the English language is, and they're like, wait, so height is spelled like this, and weight is spelled like this? Why?
Or you'll see me because we're English.
Because we're English, yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, it's
And we hate everyone.
Apparently.
We want to
We are the
everybody out.
underlined
Yeah.
font
Like, so
language.
how English
Alright,
was made
so-
is just like take a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Oh, I'll
English
take
was
some of this and then
English is special.
was made by a couple of pranksters getting
yeah.
back at the French.
Pretty much. It was special. All right. So letter/journal formatting. If you're doing a letter or a journal, first thing you're going to want to do, if the marker will ever work. All right. First thing you're going to want to do is double tap. I'm just going to say it because the markers have officially died and left us in the dust. All right. You're first going to want to double tap. Now, the reason you're going to want to double tab is because that way they are aware that it is no longer a part of the original block of text. You're going to want to do this with journal and letter formatting. Now, with letter formatting, you're going to want to do double tab, and then you're going to do single tab below it if you're doing a letter or a journal. So typically people in a journal will say like May 4th, 2013 or whatever. And then you'll have the rest of the journal entry, and it will be slightly out. So that's why you're going to want to do double tab on the first one, and then it'll probably line itself up and you can just do another single tab within the tabs. But if it doesn't, then do triple tab. So basically it's going to be a triple tab, but it should format itself so that way it auto does it. And then after that, as far as dialogue or things like that, if you're doing a letter, typically people just describe what they say. They don't actually write like he said, she said kind of things. They just said, I cannot believe that Lord so-and-so said that I was ugly. Whatever. I don't know. For some reason I went Regency.
2013?
I don't know. I went Regency there for a minute. All right. So,
Yeah, were you there for 2013? It was like
clearly it was
totally
Regency.
1800s.
Clearly. Wrong year. All right. But with that, that's typically what's going to happen with a letter. Typically people aren't going to write out dialogue. However, with a journal, some people do like to write out their official dialogue as best they remember it, right? You're going to want to do the same exact thing. The only difference is that you're going to keep it within this format. So you're going to want to make sure you tap at the beginning and then you write it as actual dialogue, unless that's what they're thinking about the dialogue. Like I said earlier, can't believe Lord so-and-so said I was ugly. How rude. Then you just say it.
At Minecon.
but if you're like, he said, and you're actually going to have it in quotation marks, then you're going to want to make sure that each time a new person is speaking, that you write it like regular. New tab, new enter, continuing forward. You're just gonna keep it generally the same format, but just put it then within the letter format. Sometimes with letter and journal, people like to put them in italics to be extra sure that you get it. You don't always have to do that, but you can. People especially like to do that for some reason when women are writing, because I don't know, it looks fancy. But you don't have to do italics, but some people do prefer italics when you're doing letter and journal entries. But you're typically going to do the same dialogue, where you just do enter and then the next line, and continue forward, if you're doing actual dialogue. With that being said, are there any other questions about letter/journal formatting?
I have a comment.
Yes, comment.
The book Dracula is very interesting exception.
Yes, granted, Dracula was also published in the 1800s when people were like,
That's true.
"Psh, I really don't care about formatting."
I don't think they knew what formatting was.
No, most people didn't. The
Or-
publishers were like, my formatting's my own opinion. It wasn't like a set rule.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree. You'll find a lot of older books that don't follow a lot of these, and that's okay. If you have your formatting style as an older style, that's okay. Just know that this is the updated official style, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have to follow it. And if you don't follow it and you see someone comment like, hey, you should probably do this, if it's a traditional publisher, sorry, you're gonna have to do it. But if it's just your editor and you're self-publishing, you don't have to. It's just recommended for clarity for readers. That's it. Not necessarily a requirement. All right.
Yeah, who wants the readers to like know what's going on?
Actually understand things. Baffling. Anyway, but yeah, if you're trying to deliberately confuse your readers, then absolutely go for it. All right, since the marker's not working, I'm just going to continue going forward, but I'm not going to move this because the light behind us is blinding, and then you can't see me on the video. All right, so next one. Oh, wait. Final questions on letter/journal formatting and dialogue. We good? Did I answer your question from earlier? Yes or no? Perfect. Okay. Next one that we're going to go over is texting back and forth, because this is now a new and up-and-coming thing, right? People are actually putting text into the text. Haha. Anyway, I had to say it. All right. So with texting back and forth, things you're not going to do. You're not going to bold. You're not going to italics, and you're not going to change font to be massively large for no apparent reason. That was actually a thing I saw. Where they're like, it's text, so I'm going to make it 14 font. I'm like, why?
You're like, you just put off all the other text.
Yes.
Stop it.
Why? Anyway,
Like,
so,
oh,
but that's okay. Again, that's why we're talking about this, is because it's just confusing for the poor reader. It's not that there's anything against you, and if you want to do that, go for it, but just know the poor reader's going to feel a little bit confused.
What if I'm affecting my readers just as much as my characters?
Oh boy. Alright, so with texting back and forth, there's a lot of things you're going to want to do with this. Typically, you're going to, I'm just going to use this as an example, pretend there's text here. You're going to want to do the name first to make sure you know who's texting. You can either do it above and then do the line below, or you can do the name and then just a colon and then have them talk. Those are two different options. Personally, I see the one above and then the line text below more commonly than I see the name colon, but name colon is definitely done, so it's a personal preference. With that being said, regardless of how you do the name, you're then going to want to make sure, this is where it gets tricky, you format it so that person A, all their dialogue is over here, and the person B, all their dialogue is on the other side of the page, like an actual text would look. So whichever person's perspective it's from, or the phone they are receiving, you're going to want to make sure they are on the left, like an actual text would be. And then the person they're texting to, or group of people, is on the right. Now with this, you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at your little alignment thing. You know how you have the alignment for center, right, and left? You're just going to want to make sure that you do enter, right, enter, this side, and then continue down the page. It's a little bit of a pain, but at least on the bright side, you will not have to redo it once you're done. So if you do it preemptively, you don't have to redo it once you're done. Or you can just do it as a big block, and then later you can go in and figure out who's who and fix it. But that's usually more annoying.
That sounds like a pain.
It is a little bit of a pain. Or if you want to be extra fancy, you can actually type it out in an actual like text thingy, and then just put the image in there.
I've seen that done before.
It's definitely been done. So I'm like, there are multiple different ways that you can do this. Just generally don't use italics, bold, or different size font, because that is just confusing to the reader, because those are typically meaning and indicative of different things, not typically text. All right. Next. First questions? Questions about texting? Okay. All right, next one, emphasis formatting. So, with emphasis formatting, so this is just generally like I'm yelling at someone or something. If you want to have them truly like just aggressively yelling, you can just do the classic all caps. I don't know why I'm holding this marker, it's useless. You could just do classic all caps. However, you do not change the font size if someone's aggressive. Just because they're yelling doesn't mean you have to change the font size to size 20. You only do that for picture books and junior fiction novels. If you were writing a junior fiction novel, feel free. If you're doing a traditional publisher, they'll probably change it, but feel free. A lot of people tend to do this in junior fiction and children's books, totally fine. But if you're doing a YA or any other genre, or even just older junior fiction, because older junior fiction is borderline YA, and I don't know why, but it falls under the same formatting categories as a result, despite it technically being in a different category. You're not going to want to do larger font sizes for anger. You're going to want to do the all caps, italic, or bold. However, if you do italic, just know italic tends to be like subtle emphasis. You're like, gosh darn it, whispered under your breath. But if you're like, gosh darn it, then you're going to want to use bold, or possibly all caps, depending on how vehement you're being. But if it's italics, it's typically more of a subtle emphasis. Now, that being said, I've seen it used all different ways, so feel free to use it any way that you would like. Just know that these are the standards, so if you try to traditionally publish, they're probably going to hold you to this standard. However, if you're self-publishing, know that your editor still might try to hold you to that standard. You don't have to listen. Alright, but it will confuse your reader because unfortunately most readers are used to traditionally published novels. So as a result, the formatting is what it is. So I would say at least consider what your editor says if you're self-publishing. At least think about, is this confusing? Is this conveying what I really want it to convey? And then if you're like, no, I really do think I want it like this, then keep it. But if you think, maybe not, that's okay too. Alright, final one. We're going to talk about file formatting. So this is like when you find a, spy paper, and they're like, this is the name of the target, and this is where they will be, and this is what food they like, so you can poison it. Those types of things. So generally you're going to want to make sure that the name is first. Usually the name and age and things like that are first. So you're going to want to do the basics first. Pretty boring basic stuff. Then you're going to want to go into more detail, like they have 5 beautiful daughters that could easily take the throne, so if we kill them, it's not a big deal. You're going to want that later on the page. You're also going to want to make sure that this is bolded. The name, age, gender, etc. Like the beginning of each category is bolded and then has a colon right before it. And then you're going to want to fill out the rest of the information. You can do italics if you want, but you don't necessarily have to. You can just do regular font at that point. And typically I'd say double tab just to make sure that they know it is on a paper and you're not just telling us this information. However, you don't have to double tab it. But you have to at least single tab it. Please. Tabs are important. Any other questions about formatting? Like, what are weird things you've seen? What are things that you're confused about or anything like that? Or are we feeling pretty good? Feeling pretty good? Great. Fantastic. All right. Then I keep trying to pick up the marker, but it's not going to help me. All right. So next we're going to talk about titles. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, 80% of people only pay attention to the title, and if the title's not interesting, they don't read it. They don't even pick it up, which makes me sad. I kind of want to cry. But that's why we gotta figure out how to make the title important, right? So with that being said, the top things that you're gonna want to make sure your title has are as follows. You want to make sure it's a unique title. You want to make sure it's easily memorable. You don't want to have a 27-word title. You also want to make sure it is the only one. If you have The Girl on the Train, and then someone else has already published Girl on the Train, too close. No one's gonna know whose is whose and what is what. And the likelihood that they're gonna read the one that's already published first is very high. So if you want people to pick up your book and not just assume it's a reprint of a different book, make sure you're the only one. Or make sure that you have a variation on the title that's interesting. So instead of The Girl on the Train, you could say, Murderous Girl on the Train. Now that changes things a lot. So it still has girl on the train, but it's not just a the or an or something vague. All right. Next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure it's eye-catching or emotionally evoking. So it makes you feel something, or when you look at the title, you're kind of like, I don't know what that means, but I want to figure out what that means. And that's okay. Those are both good ways to do it. Next one is it has to have something to do with the book, and it can't just be a passing comment or the last line. I know some people do this, and it used to be a really popular thing, especially in like 1990s for some reason, where like the title of the book would be the very last line that the person says, but then the reader's just sitting there reading the whole book trying to figure out why, and then they read the last line and they feel a little bit cheated. They're like, really? I thought it was going to be the whole theme of the book, and it's just the last line.
Let's do something like really clever.
Yes, unless
like,
it's very clever.
Like so you have the title like, I don't know, Shadow King. And it's about this like little boy going up on the streets, but then this like old dude comes to him like, you are the Shadow King, like
Yes.
I'm at your service. That'd be cool.
That would be cool. See, that would be cool. But see, then again, it's also a theme, right? It kind of is a evoking image. It's not just like the name is Catch Me If You Can, and then James Bond at the end says, Catch Me If You Can. It's like, I feel bored. But yeah, if you're doing something like that, cool. Yes.
You're just kind of reminding me of this video where it's like how to make a movie. And
Yes.
it's like how to find the title, find any random line in the middle of the dialogue and put it on the title.
Yep. A lot of people do that. I don't know why. Personally, it's not my
I've
preference.
seen it so many
but
times I just want to spot the title. I'm like, oh, there it is in this random conversation that has
Yep.
no value to the plot.
It's like, at least has to have plot value, in my personal opinion. All right. Speaking of which, the next one talks about good titles creating a promise that is fulfilled. And by promise that is fulfilled, it has to be a large promise. It can't just be random dialogue that has no real meaning to the plot. It is just there. It needs to make sure that that promise is fulfilled. So, for example, if the title is, I don't know, The Blue Alien. There needs to be a blue alien, and it needs to be an important part of the story. You can't just have it be like, there was a blue alien, and that's why everyone's freaking out. Can't be in the past, has to be in the now. You gotta focus on it in the present of the actual plot. All right. Next one, use powerful words or image-evoking phrases. For example, the False Prince or the Lord of the Rings. Those both evoke images and are powerful words. Lord. That is a powerful commanding word, right? And the False Prince. It creates this allure of prince, but he's false. It creates a question, but is also very powerful wording. He's not just the fake prince. He's not just the stand-in prince. He's the false prince. False is a much more evocative word. So it's also about what words you choose. A title could be good, but it could be better if you use certain words. Next and final one, it has to be semi-pronounceable. If you're going to use a made-up word, it has to at least be able to be pronounced if you look at it hard enough. If you look at it, okay, this is when testing comes into play, and we're going to talk more about this in a minute. But you're going to want to make sure you test out your title with several people who have never seen your title before if you're going to do semi-unpronounceable things. And you're going to want to show it to them and say, if you stared at this for, let's say, 5 seconds, could you pronounce this? And if they try, and that's nothing like what you're going for, probably don't use it. Because that means when someone randomly sees it on the shelf and they're like, oh yeah, I read this book about the king, that's not going to be helpful. But however, if they're like, the king of Gibraltar, or something like that, that's cool. Like, see, you made it up, but at the same time, it's pronounceable.
That sounds cool.
Thank you. It randomly came to my brain. All right, so I'm glad that worked as well as I was hoping it sounded in my brain. But see, this is why you make sure when you say it, and you make sure that you let them figure it out. You don't tell them, can you figure out that this is X? Because then, of course, they're going to figure it out. You have to just hand it to them and say, how would you pronounce this?
Like, what word is this?
Exactly.
Go.
How would you pronounce it? Just tell me what word this is. And if they can pronounce it, you're probably good to put it in your title. But if they cannot pronounce it and they're stumbling all over the place, probably not good to put it in the title. All right. So those are the main things for titles that you're going to want to consider. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is first brainstorm. You're not just going to pick the first title that comes into your brain. Sorry, probably not. Maybe you are, and if so, that's great. But generally, your first title is a work in progress. You're going to want to have at least, I'm going to say 5 minimum, but the more the merrier, of brainstormed titles.
I had a really good title going for the thing I'm writing, and then I realized it's already a song, and I'm like, I have to come up with a new one.
Right, because then, like you said, it's already referenced to something popular, so it's,
Yeah.
It'd be like naming your book Harry Potter.
No, it's
Bad
it's
idea.
It's actually Harry Potter, but with an I at the end.
With an I at the end, Harry
So
Potter.
it's different. It's different.
That just
Yeah.
sounds bad.
Definitely not fan fiction.
Yes, but yeah. So there you go. That's why it's important to make sure you don't have the title that's the same as someone else's. And I will say I actually have run across this. When I was a kid, I used to do what was called Battle of the Books. Some of you might be familiar with that.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a book title that they actually ended up taking off halfway through because half the kids kept reading the wrong book because there were 2 books with the same title. And so they finally were like, we're not even going to count that one because people keep reading the wrong dang book. And unfortunately, they were both by the author with the same last name, too.
Oh,
Really
snap.
should have done their research. Yeah, I don't know. They were both called something like the Knight of the Bear, and they both had the last name Nelson or something. And so, like, of
Wow.
course you have no idea which one it is.
They were cousins and right. So
Yes, and they were like, I got it first. And so they did, but just didn't give
Like
it a
Sarah
try.
and
I don't
Noah
know.
working on that one book.
But yeah, so basically you're going to want to make sure that if anyone else has that title, you scrap it, you get rid of it. You generally don't want a title that's the same as someone else's, especially because if it's more popular, which one are they going to pick when they look it up? The more popular one. All right, next one is make sure you figure out which ones follow the previous tips. Make sure it's pronounceable, make sure it creates a promise, make sure that you use powerful words or emotionally evoking and image evoking words. Make sure that it's eye-catching, make sure that you're not the only one, and that it's unique and memorable.
That you're not the only one, that you are the
That you are the only one.
Yeah, that you are the only
Sorry,
one.
I probably said that wrong. My brain is shorting. All right, it's short-circuiting. All right, so make sure that it follows those, and if all of your titles, so once you've brainstormed your titles, probably around 5, I would say 10 just to be safe, but 5 at minimum, then you're going to want to cross out any that you're like, oh, found one with the same title, or oh, this one isn't very unique, and you're going to want to keep crossing them out until you generally have 2 left. Be at least a little bit forgiving. And then when you have those 2 left, the last thing you're going to do is you're going to give a basic summary of your book, like maybe 3 sentences. And then you're going to hand it to someone and then hand them the 2 titles and say, based on this summary, which title fits better. And then get at least 10 people. And then whichever one wins, I'd probably say go with that one, unless you absolutely hate the title. But then why did you have them vote on it?
Yeah.
So generally make sure you don't hate the titles beforehand. But as long as you love both titles, then hand it to about 10 different people. And if they read it and are like, oh, well, I prefer this title, and you notice that about 8 out of 10 prefer that title, pick that one.
Yeah.
That's generally going to help with marketing, because if you go to a bunch of random people and they all like this particular title for this summary, that means that as a marketing person, if a random person saw it on the shelf, they'd pick it up. Now, the last thing I'm going to say with the title, just because we talked about judging a book by its cover, you also got to make sure that your title is in a fun font on the cover. It's not just basic Times New Roman. Make sure that whatever you do, it's a fun font and it matches your theme. So like if it's a horror book, you could do like spooky crackly font. Or if it's a Regency novel, maybe do fancy cursive font. Or something like that. Make sure it fits the mood and the style. Now that's more of a formatting thing that goes with the title thing, but I do think it's important because I've seen a lot of people just use the basic like Arial Times New Roman fonts for their title. It doesn't stand out, irregardless of how cool your title is. It just kind of looks boring.
No, I'll go show everyone right now.
But that's why it's important. That's why font is actually super important. There was actually a whole article I ran across earlier that someone sent me when I mentioned I was doing this about how the history of Helvetica font came to be, and it's actually quite fascinating. But the whole idea is the fact that with font, it actually does matter, and with titles, it does matter too. All right, any questions about titles? Creating titles and formatting and stuff? No questions? Okay, great. Then we are going to move on to editing and such. Bye, everyone who's on the video. If you have a question, please comment it down below and subscribe, because then they come out every week, and then you can thank you, and then you can see it every week. Thank you.
And then